Welcome to another episode of Teaching in the Time of Coronavirus. The topic I'd like to cover this time is assessment. Assessment is something that I know a lot of people are really concerned with right now. We're trying to make a transition to online teaching with very short notice, and as part of that we have to think about how we're going to assess the learning for our students at a distance. And so I know many people are concerned about this. There's a number of problems, issues, concerns that everybody's thinking about in relating to how they're going to do assessments. So first, I would like to talk about just going back to the ideas of flexibility, kindness, some other things that I've been discussing in previous videos. And one part of that is remembering that students probably have as many or more concerns about this, especially probably students who are more high achieving and a little bit more worried about their grades. But every student is going to be in a situation right now where they're concerned about how they're going to be graded. Is that grading going to be fair? Do they have the same, technology access that they're going to need to be successful? So the frustrations and concerns are not just on your end. These are going to be affecting your students as well. And that is another reason why we need to remember things like that I've mentioned in other videos, like flexibility, thinking about this in terms of kindness. All of those are important factors as we look at this really big challenge of how do we do assessment. So personally, I've attended recently several webinars looking at the whole online switch. I will try to post in the description of this episode links to some of those webinars as soon as they're available, so that you can see, because these questions came up many times in these different webinars I've been attending on the switch to online learning. And so a couple of things that I've already been thinking about, and some things that I've also learned at some of these other webinars, is some strategies that we can think about. One thing that we need to look at is, do we have to do assessments the same way that we've been doing them? This is a different environment. It's a different situation overall, just the whole situation we're under right now. So one aspect of this that we need to be thinking about is really, is the traditional timed exam with a proctor the best way to be handling things right now? That's what we typically do in a classroom. We can sit there, we have ourselves and our TAs or other proctors available, and that works fine in that situation. But we don't have the same resources and the same situation right now. So rethinking the kind of exam that you're going to give is one thing to look at. The idea of take-home tests have been around forever. Everybody's familiar with what those are. Maybe a take-home approach is literally what we need to be looking at right now. That's something that we can think about, and if that works in your situation, that's a very good option to consider. Open book tests are another part of that, and one option within something like a take-home. Can you design your tests so that they're really focusing more on assessing how the students work with the knowledge rather than their recall of facts and information? And that's moving higher into the Bloom's learning levels, which is what we really hope to be focusing on many times in our courses anyway. So that's one aspect we can think about. If you're going to stay with the more sort of traditional exam, where your students are going to be sitting down, answering a series of questions in a given period of time, you can do that online. Most of the course management systems have a number of options for how you can do that. A couple of things that you can think about in doing that is, how are you going to limit time? What's the appropriate time limit? How long does it take for them to answer each question? Those sorts of things. I think we have to be really careful how we approach this. And if we're approaching this from the standpoint of worry about cheating, then we're already sort of approaching it from a negative aspect. We're thinking about how are we going to stop students from cheating. That may not be always the best way to approach this. We want to, cheating is going to happen even in the classroom when you're doing everything possible to stop it. Some student figures out a way to cheat. So we can't think about those exceptions, those students who are going to try to get around the rules all the time. We need to think about the majority of our students are honest and they are trying to do the right thing, and so we need to give them the situation where we're giving them some benefit of the doubt. And so thinking about that in terms of how you set up your exams, you can set up the exams to make it fair to everyone, so that the student who sort of decides to try to bend the rules isn't going to have an advantage over those who don't. And just a couple of ways of doing that, just with an online regular kind of exam, you can again think about how long do they have for each question, give them a reasonable amount of time so that the student who's actually going from recall can answer the question and get a good opportunity to be correct, versus the student who's trying to look up every answer probably won't have enough time to do that successfully. And so that's going to vary depending on the kind of tests you're happening. So I can't really give you details on exactly how long you should give for each question. You can also do things where you randomize the test order, so the questions are given to all the students in a different order. So that's going to make it harder for students to try to talk to each other, maybe getting online and trying to take the test at the same time and calling each other. And you can also look at it where they randomize the answer choices. And that just, again, is going to, the student who's trying to take the shortcut and say, oh, the answer to 2 is B, is not going to really have an advantage, because the answer to number question 2 is going to change depending on who's taking it and when. You can also have a pool of questions where you have equivalent questions and students get a different question every time. So different students might get a different question out of that pool, but they're all being assessed on the same knowledge. Those all take time to set up, and the simplest way to do things quickly would be if you've been giving a standard multiple choice test previously. You could give that same test by converting it to an online test and just randomizing the order of the questions or the answers. Those are usually just quick click buttons on the learning management system, so they're not hard to do, and it doesn't require a lot of modification. If you want to create pools of questions, things like that, that does take a lot more thought, because you want to make sure that the questions are equivalent in the knowledge being assessed, and that some students aren't going to get a harder question versus another. So those are all issues you can think about. I would also mention, if you're going to set time limits on individual questions or on the test itself, I know the learning management system that we have does have the ability for you to go in and change the settings for individual students, so that if you have students with accessibility accommodations where they need extra time on tests, you can do that for those particular students individually. So I know that's possible on the learning management system I use. So that's another part of thinking about how you're putting this together, so that it's still giving all students the chance to be successful. There are probably countless other ways to look at these approaches and adapt them for your own particular uses. But I think those are a good overview of some of the main ones I've heard so far. And another thing is to think about, assessment doesn't mean test. So there's a number of other ways that you could assess particular types of knowledge through projects and presentations and other things. So it doesn't, we all probably tend to jump to the idea that an assessment is a test. But there are many other ways of assessing that knowledge, and you can be creative in thinking about opportunities like that as well. All right, if you have other suggestions and that we can share, I would love for you to post those in the discussion for this video. And once again, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this episode, and I will see you soon.